The lights of New York City had never shined brighter. The red carpet was ablaze with flashbulbs, the buzz around the long-anticipated reboot of The Naked Gun electrifying the summer air. Liam Neeson, reimagining the iconic role made famous by Leslie Nielsen, had arrived to thunderous applause. Pamela Anderson, radiant and resurgent, stunned onlookers in a sleek silver gown, effortlessly commanding attention. Hollywood was out in full force, reuniting for a comedy legacy that promised to bring old-school slapstick into the digital age. Yet, amid all the excitement, no one could have predicted that one of the most talked-about moments of the night wouldn't happen inside the theater, or even on the screen, but rather in a single, sharp remark delivered just a few feet from the velvet rope. As cameras turned and murmurs spread across the red carpet, BJ Novak, the quick-witted actor and writer known for his deadpan delivery on The Office, stepped aside for interviews. Always composed, always subtly cutting, Novak smiled at a reporter's casual mention of an unexpected guest, Meghan Markle, Duchess of Sussex, who had just arrived, uninvited, at the premiere. His response was instantaneous. With a perfectly timed smirk, he quipped, "What's she doing here? Oh, right, just playing dress-up again." Royal to red carpet. Classic wannabe energy. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. It wasn't loud. It wasn't shouted. But it didn't need to be. The comments sliced through the air like a dagger dipped in sarcasm. The reporter laughed awkwardly, unsure whether to respond or pretend it hadn't happened. But it was too late. Someone had caught it. A phone. A boom mic. An open mic on a camera rig. Within minutes, it was everywhere. Twitter, Instagram, TMZ, Reddit. And as the quote picked up steam, so did the reactions: shock, glee, outrage, amusement. A line had been crossed, or maybe it had just been finally drawn. But this wasn't just a cheap shot, and it wasn't a random jab. This was a public figure, known for his deliberate words and dry comedic insight, calling out one of the most polarizing figures in recent pop culture. To some, Novak's words confirmed what they'd always suspected about Meghan, an opportunist chasing relevance, clinging to borrowed nobility in a city that worships fame. To others, it was cruel, unnecessary, even misogynistic. But what couldn't be denied was the timing, the context, the intentionality. Why would BJ Novak, a man who rarely enters tabloid headlines, choose this moment, this event, and this woman to aim his verbal crosshairs at? To understand that, we need to peel back the glittering curtain that often obscures celebrity behavior. We need to go deeper than the red carpet, beyond the fan-made montages and press releases. Because what happened at the Naked Gun premiere wasn't just a moment. It was a culmination of reputations clashing, industries shifting, and a royal escapee walking a tightrope between admiration and exhaustion in the eyes of the public. Meghan Markle, since stepping away from royal duties in 2020, has been no stranger to controversy. Her move to California with Prince Harry was framed, by some, as a brave leap toward independence, a rejection of archaic traditions, and silent suffering. But for others, it felt more like a carefully staged PR campaign, complete with tell-all interviews, brand partnerships, and a flurry of projects that seemed more focused on media attention than meaningful impact. Her appearance at the premiere was not only unexpected, it was, by most accounts, uninvited. While Harry was nowhere in sight, Meghan's arrival was unmistakable. Cameras caught her stepping onto the red carpet in a tailored black jumpsuit, her smile wide, her presence unmistakable. But to industry insiders, something was off. She wasn't listed among the confirmed guests. Her name wasn't on the official press memo. No one had her seat marked in the front rows. So why was she there? Some whispered it was a power move, a reminder that she could still command headlines. Others believed she was attempting to reinsert herself into Hollywood's inner circle, perhaps sensing the Sussex brand losing momentum as partnerships with Spotify and Netflix quietly faded into the background. And then there were those who claimed she was simply chasing relevance, trying to stay visible in an increasingly crowded celebrity landscape, where one's value is often measured by presence, not purpose. Enter BJ Novak, a man who built his career on understated irony and self-aware humor. Novak is no stranger to the absurdity of fame. He's watched the industry devour its darlings, elevate influencers to icons, and blur the lines between royalty and reality TV. For him, perhaps Meghan's arrival wasn't just an awkward misstep. It was emblematic of a larger problem: the performative hunger, the need to be seen, the desperation cloaked in glamour. Calling her a wannabe wasn't about cruelty. It was commentary. In his eyes, this wasn't a duchess reclaiming her identity. It was a social climber crashing a party that wasn't hers to begin with. But what makes this story truly captivating isn't just the insult or the reaction. It's what the moment revealed. Because within hours of Novak's remark hitting the internet, Meghan's team was already mobilizing. According to multiple anonymous sources close to the event organizers, frantic calls were made. Media outlets received sudden offers of exclusive quotes, behind-the-scenes photos, and even snippets of projects in development that were conveniently timed to overshadow the scandal. Friendly podcasts and lifestyle blogs ran soft-focus pieces about Meghan's radiant appearance and bold fashion choices, steering the narrative away from Novak's dagger and back into safer, curated territory. But the damage was done. The label had stuck. Not because it was necessarily true, but because it resonated with something bubbling under the surface of public consciousness. A fatigue. A feeling that perhaps the Meghan narrative, once filled with empathy and admiration, had begun to wear thin. This wasn't the first time someone had questioned Meghan's authenticity, but it was perhaps the most casual, most brutally honest, and most public. And that's where our story begins. Because this isn't just about a comment on a red carpet. It's about power, perception, the machinery of fame. It's about who gets to write their own narrative and what happens when others decide to flip the script. It's about the line between aspiration and affectation. And what happens when you're caught standing on both sides of it. As we peel back the layers of this moment, we'll uncover a web of strategic appearances, calculated alliances, media manipulation, and the silent judgments of an industry that may be too polite to speak publicly, but occasionally lets the truth slip through a joke. So, what does it really mean to be called a wannabe in the world of celebrity royalty? Why did BJ Novak risk saying it aloud? And what does it reveal about Meghan Markle, her choices, and the shifting tides of sympathy, admiration, and skepticism that follow her? Stick around, because by the end of this journey, what started as a one-liner might just unfold into one of the most telling cultural flashpoints of the year. And it all began with a smirk, a mic, and a single word whispered just loud enough for the world to hear. The night had all the makings of a modern Hollywood spectacle. Midtown Manhattan pulsed with excitement. Fans lined barricades outside the Lincoln Square Theater, their hands clutching phones, posters, and programs as they eagerly awaited a glimpse of the stars. The energy was electric, charged by months of anticipation surrounding the highly publicized reboot of The Naked Gun. It was supposed to be a homage to a comedy classic, the return of slapstick absurdity in an era saturated with superhero grit. Liam Neeson had surprised everyone by agreeing to take on the role of Detective Frank Drebin, a character etched into comedy legend by the late Leslie Nielsen. The announcement alone had sparked months of curiosity, even disbelief. Neeson, known for his gravel-voiced intensity and tragic past, was hardly the face most associated with satire. Yet here he was, reborn in a parody world, beside Pamela Anderson of all people. This particular evening was as carefully orchestrated as any Oscar campaign. From the invites to the seating charts, from the step-and-repeat backdrops to the coordinated social media blasts, every detail was locked in place. And as the stars began to arrive, the carpet became its own performance. Paparazzi shouted names, stylists adjusted gowns, and flashes turned the black night into a strobing arena of artificial light. Inside the velvet ropes, everything looked under control. Until it wasn't. It started with a shift in body language. One photographer stopped mid-click, narrowing his eyes at a figure approaching from the opposite end of the carpet. Then another. Then murmurs rippled outward from the core of the media pit. She wasn't on the list. Meghan Markle. Alone. There was no advanced publicist prepping outlets for her arrival. No handlers flanking her on either side to usher her past cameras or issue quotes to the press. She simply appeared, elegant, confident, and unmistakably present. Wearing a structured black jumpsuit with a plunging neckline and gold accent belt, she smiled like she'd been invited. Like she belonged. The photographers, trained to capture faces in fractions of seconds, snapped to attention. Despite her lack of official placement on the event's lineup, Meghan knew how to work a carpet. She'd done it countless times before, first as an actress, later as a royal, and now as something in between. She paused just long enough to allow the cameras to do their work, then moved forward, nodding as if recognizing familiar faces, some of which seemed more surprised than pleased to see her. Inside the media tent, publicists scrambled. Her name had not been cleared. This wasn't some accidental red carpet wanderer. This was Meghan Markle, whose every move since marrying into the British royal family had been dissected, debated, and declared a cultural moment. The idea that she had appeared at an event of this size, this significance, without clearance from event organizers sent a shock through the behind-the-scenes operations. Some speculated that a low-level assistant may have mistakenly assumed she had been granted access and waved her through. Others believed Meghan simply took advantage of the chaos of the arrivals and walked in without question. But no matter how it happened, the result was undeniable. Meghan was now part of the night. And not everyone was pleased. Guests who had worked tirelessly to be there, producers, supporting cast, financiers, began whispering. Who had invited her? What was she doing there? Some felt it was a power play. Others believed it was desperation wrapped in glamour. And just when the whispers were gaining volume, the flashpoint arrived. BJ Novak, dressed sharply in a navy suit and open-collar white shirt, was midway through a relaxed interview about his cameo in the film and the joy of collaborating with Neeson and Anderson. Known for his dry humor, Novak was a welcome voice of subtlety in an industry growing ever louder. Then, the reporter's eyes widened slightly, her attention stolen by the figure moving just behind him. She leaned in and said something softly, off mic, but it was enough. Novak glanced over his shoulder, clocked Meghan, and without hesitation said, "What's she doing here?" "Oh, right, just playing dress-up again." Royal to red carpet. Classic wannabe energy. It was too sharp, too specific, too off-the-cuff to be anything other than authentic. A nearby camera operator tilted his boom slightly closer, sensing the moment shift. The reporter blinked, her face flickering between amusement and discomfort. But the clip had already been captured. A few seconds, a smirk, a phrase. And the atmosphere changed entirely. Meghan, whether she heard the remark or not, did not stop. She continued forward, pausing again for photos, then slipping inside the theater as if nothing had happened. But outside, the narrative was now in motion. Someone had spoken aloud what many had perhaps been too cautious to voice publicly. For the next hour, the premiere unfolded as planned. Speeches were made. The film played to peals of laughter. Liam Neeson, in his bizarre comedic debut, won over even the most skeptical critics. Pamela Anderson's self-aware performance was hailed as a career-defining pivot. Applause rang through the halls. But outside the theater, a different conversation was erupting. Within minutes of Novak's comment hitting Twitter, initially in the form of a grainy phone-recorded video, it exploded. Hashtags like #WannabeDuchess and #BJNovakUnfiltered began trending. Opinion columns sprang up before the screening had even ended. Celebrities weighed in. Some defended Meghan, arguing that her presence added star power to the event. Others asked the question that would dominate the days ahead. Why was she even there? To the casual observer, it may have seemed like a simple matter of celebrity politics. But to those embedded in the industry, this was an incident layered with subtext. The premiere had been meticulously curated to serve a particular purpose: relaunch an iconic franchise, celebrate unlikely comedic turns by big-name stars, and cement a new kind of nostalgia for a modern audience. Meghan's arrival, unplanned and unaligned with the film, hijacked that spotlight, intentionally or not. Novak's joke wasn't just a jab at her presence. It was a pointed commentary on Hollywood's shifting boundaries. In a world where fame had become increasingly divorced from merit or craft, where brand building often mattered more than performance, where former royals and reality stars could command the same media real estate as Oscar winners, Novak had drawn a line. Meghan, of course, had her defenders. As the event wrapped and photos circulated, her supporters hailed her fashion, her grace, her defiance of gatekeeping elitism. They framed her attendance as an act of independence, a woman reclaiming her space in the world she once belonged to. But beneath the headlines and reaction posts, something else was beginning to shift. In the past, Meghan's controversies had been wrapped in a larger narrative of injustice, racism, royal cruelty, media harassment. But this was different. This wasn't about palaces or protocols. This was about presence, timing, optics, intent. And it left even some of her loyal followers with questions. Why this event? Why now? Was it about visibility or about validation? And why was it BJ Novak, of all people, who had finally said what so many others, executives, actors, producers, had only muttered behind closed doors? In the days to come, these questions would take center stage. But on that night, as the stars filtered out of the theater and Meghan Markle's name dominated yet another news cycle, one truth had already crystallized. The premiere of The Naked Gun had set out to reintroduce absurdity to the big screen. What it ended up doing was revealing something far more serious and far more revealing about fame, power, and the price of being seen. It was the kind of moment that could easily have gone unnoticed. A few stray words said casually in the controlled chaos of a red carpet, where laughter, banter, and shallow small talk often fill the air like background music. But this moment, however fleeting it seemed at the time, struck a nerve deep within the glittering walls of celebrity culture. In a matter of hours, it would evolve into a media storm, a cultural conversation, and for some, a breaking point. BJ Novak hadn't raised his voice. He didn't scowl or point. The delivery was nonchalant, nearly playful in its tone. Yet the remark landed with the weight of a sledgehammer. What's she doing here? Oh, right, just playing dress up again. Royal to red carpet. Classic wannabe energy. There was a silence that followed, almost imperceptible but charged. It wasn't the silence of offense or confrontation. It was the silence of realization, of people understanding, in real time, that something had just been said that couldn't be walked back. It was a moment of raw, unscripted truth in an environment designed to be anything but. Novak's eyes lingered in the direction of Meghan Markle for just a second longer than necessary. The corners of his mouth curled in that trademark expression, half amused, half unimpressed. And then he turned back to the reporter, who blinked, momentarily unsure whether to laugh or change the subject. She did neither, because by then, a nearby assistant's phone had already lit up with the sound of Twitter notifications. There was nothing accidental about the phrase Novak chose. The words playing dress up weren't just dismissive, they carried a specific sting. In Hollywood, where image is often curated to microscopic detail, accusing someone of playing dress up is a way of stripping them of authenticity, of suggesting that their presence is performance, that they don't belong in the costume they're wearing, be it a gown, a crown, or a brand. And the term wannabe, sharp, loaded, unrelenting, wasn't just an insult. It was a judgment. In that short sentence, Novak hadn't just commented on Meghan's surprise appearance. He'd questioned her identity, her trajectory, her perceived obsession with image and relevance. And he did it all with the kind of unbothered detachment that made it feel like a throwaway joke. But it wasn't. Inside the theater, as the premiere continued, no one spoke of it, at least not openly. But backstage, in the press lounges and VIP refreshment areas, the quote was already circulating. Whispers turned into texts. Texts turned into tweets. By the time the first critics were filing their early reactions to the film, media outlets were scrambling to confirm whether the clip was real. It didn't take long. By midnight, multiple recordings of Novak's comment had surfaced, each slightly different in angle and audio clarity, but unmistakably authentic. The footage showed Novak speaking, the reporter reacting, Meghan walking just behind them, oblivious or perhaps simply pretending to be. The moment was clear, and so was the message. It wasn't the sort of controversy that typically lights up Hollywood. It wasn't about a leaked email or a behind-the-scenes feud. It was more subtle, and perhaps more dangerous, because it cut to the heart of something unspoken in the celebrity world. The idea of earned status, real belonging, unwelcome intrusion. The reaction from the public was immediate, and it was divisive. Some viewers, particularly those already skeptical of Meghan's post-royal narrative, embraced Novak's jab as an overdue reckoning. They praised him for saying what others wouldn't, for pulling back the curtain on what they saw as Meghan's strategic appearances, always timed, always theatrical. They flooded social media with supportive memes, sharp commentary, and threads connecting her presence at the premiere to her broader efforts to maintain visibility in a culture that thrives on attention. Others were less amused. Supporters of Meghan labeled the comment misogynistic, snide, and mean-spirited. They argued that Novak, a man with a platform and privilege, was mocking a woman simply for showing up, for dressing up, for daring to be seen. They pointed out the double standards, how male celebrities regularly attend events without direct affiliation. The thing about Hollywood, though, is that it remembers faces. It remembers dynamics. It remembers who showed up to the parties before they were famous and who didn't. And so, when Meghan returned not as an actress but as a brand, she found herself in unfamiliar territory. She no longer needed casting directors. She needed producers, financiers, studio heads. And they didn't see her as a peer anymore. They saw her as a wild card. She wasn't seeking auditions or reading scripts. She was pitching content, leading campaigns, creating companies. There was no humility in the return, no sense that she'd been away learning and was ready to rejoin the creative fold. Instead, there was a carefully cultivated image of royalty reimagined for the California coast. Barefoot on the beach, casual in jeans, talking about trauma, parenting, and self-worth in the soft lighting of her Montecito home. To her audience, particularly younger women, progressive thinkers, and marginalized groups, this was inspiring. To Hollywood insiders, it was murky. Where, exactly, did Meghan fit now? She wasn't a producer, though she had a production company. She wasn't a director, though she shaped narratives. She wasn't a journalist, though she conducted interviews. She wasn't an influencer, though she moved like one. The ambiguity became her armor, but it also became her liability. People began to question the intentions behind her every move. Was she building something lasting, or simply extending the spotlight? Was she passionate about the stories she pitched, or simply packaging her experience into content? Every podcast, every short-lived series, every media appearance was scrutinized, not for its impact, but for its motive. Nowhere was this more evident than in the Netflix docuseries Harry and Meghan. Billed as an intimate look at their love story and their exit from royal life, the show promised honesty and transparency. And to some extent, it delivered. But it also raised questions about performance, about timing, about whether the couple was truly pulling back the curtain or merely adjusting the lighting. Meghan, in particular, was accused of over-narrating her own heroism. The scenes were beautifully shot, the interviews deeply personal. But for many, it felt less like truth-telling and more like myth-building. And Hollywood, which thrives on story but loathes sanctimony, took note. Suddenly, the calculated nature of Meghan's Hollywood return became more pronounced. She wasn't attending premieres as a guest. She was attending them as an emblem. She wasn't being cast. She was casting herself in the role of visionary, changemaker, survivor. And in doing so, she positioned herself apart from the very people she needed to build trust with, the creatives, the collaborators, the gatekeepers. It's important to say that Meghan is not the first public figure to walk this line. Many before her have transformed trauma into purpose, have monetized memoirs, and mined personal history for brand resonance. But Meghan's journey was different because of the speed and the stakes. She had not just changed lanes, she had changed highways entirely. And for many in Hollywood, it was too fast, too seamless, too orchestrated. That's why BJ Novak's words landed with such brutal precision, playing dress up again, because it was a comment not just on that night, but on the pattern that had emerged over years. A sense that Meghan was always presenting, always producing, always crafting a version of herself to match the moment. Was it unfair? Possibly. Was it misogynistic? Some would argue so. But was it rooted in a collective, cultural perception that had been slowly taking shape? Yes, undeniably. Because in a town where reinvention is revered but authenticity is currency, Meghan had begun to feel like a brand trying to impersonate a person. And that perception, fair or not, had consequences. The lackluster performance of her media ventures, the cooling interest from corporate partners, the quiet withdrawal of once eager collaborators, all of it pointed to the same conclusion. Hollywood wasn't buying the story anymore. Not because it wasn't compelling, but because it didn't feel real. And for someone who had once been so adept at controlling her narrative, that shift was seismic. It is not to say that Meghan's contributions are meaningless, or that her intentions are malicious. But in a world where image often precedes impact, she has become a symbol of something larger, the delicate, often dangerous, dance between authenticity and ambition. And when ambition becomes too visible, when it gleams through every polished press release, every Instagram-perfect photo, every glossy documentary, people begin to pull back. Even in a town like Hollywood, where ambition is currency, there's a line. And Meghan, knowingly or not, has spent years dancing right on top of it. The term wannabe is deceptively simple, 2 syllables, often used in jest, sometimes in scorn, occasionally in jestful affection. But when delivered with precision, in a moment where the stakes are high and the cameras are rolling, it can feel like a slap, a rhetorical dagger, a public accusation without needing a courtroom. That's what happened when B.J. Novak, with his dry comedic sensibility and well-honed timing, let the words slip, or perhaps strategically deploy, on the red carpet. The remark wasn't just a comment about Meghan Markle's unexpected arrival at the Naked Gun premiere. It was a statement, an indictment, and a cultural trigger all in one. And the public responded, not with consensus, but with a firestorm. Within hours, Wannabe became the battleground for opinion. Twitter threads dissected its usage. Influencers hosted live sessions, debating whether Novak's quip was harmless snark or the kind of microaggression that cloaked deeper resentment. On Reddit, subreddits exploded with discussion, from royal family followers to feminist forums and celebrity gossip pages. Everyone had an opinion, and nobody was indifferent. To understand why the reaction was so intense, you have to understand what wannabe really means and why, when applied to someone like Meghan Markle, it hit with such force. At its core, a wannabe is someone seen as aspiring toward a status or identity they do not genuinely possess. It's someone perceived as mimicking greatness rather than embodying it. In the realm of pop culture, the word often targets people who are seen as inauthentic, performative, or desperate to belong. But it carries more than just connotation. It carries implication. That the person being called a wannabe is trying too hard. That they're pretending. That they're not enough of what they're trying to be. For Meghan Markle, who has spent years carefully shaping her public identity, from Hollywood actress to duchess to humanitarian to media executive, the label struck at the very foundation of her reinvention. It undermined her transformation. It cast doubt on her legitimacy. It questioned her intentions, her authenticity, and her place in spaces she now occupies. But more than that, it triggered a reckoning among the public. The reactions were layered and contradictory. For a segment of the audience, particularly those who had grown disillusioned with Meghan over the years, the term felt like long overdue honesty. They believed Novak had said what many were thinking, that Meghan's public persona was a carefully constructed facade, more about branding than belief. To them, wannabe was not an insult, it was a truth bomb. It captured their frustration with a figure who, in their view, had abandoned grace in favor of relentless self-promotion. They saw in Meghan a symbol of modern celebrity hypocrisy, someone who spoke about privacy while constantly generating headlines, someone who claimed to reject the monarchy while using royal status to ink deals, someone who left the UK to heal but never left the spotlight. And for these individuals, Novak's comment didn't feel like bullying, it felt like justice. A rare moment when someone in Hollywood dared to speak unfiltered, without fear of being canceled or cast out. But another portion of the public saw something entirely different. To them, wannabe was a lazy, misogynistic jab, a coded way to diminish a powerful woman. They argued that Novak, a man whose own fame was largely built through association with a larger ensemble, and often alongside more prominent co-stars, had no business judging a woman's journey. Especially one who had faced relentless racism, classism, and character assassination at the hands of the British tabloids. Supporters of Meghan framed the label as an attempt to reduce her achievements, erase her resilience, and silence her ambition. They pointed out that no matter what she did, she was criticized. When she stayed silent, she was accused of being complicit. When she spoke up, she was told she was attention-seeking. The double standard was glaring, and Novak's comment, to them, was just the latest manifestation of that dynamic. Journalists weighed in with op-eds that dissected the moment through different lenses. Some saw it as emblematic of the media's obsession with tearing down powerful women, especially women of color. Others approached it from a celebrity culture perspective, arguing that Meghan had indeed blurred the lines between personal pain and public spectacle. But even those who remained neutral were fascinated. Because whether you agreed with Novak or not, the word wannabe had done something rare. It had reignited a cultural conversation that had, until that point, been quietly fading. The Sussex narrative, once white-hot in its urgency and ubiquity, had begun to cool in recent months. Public interest had dipped. Projects were delayed. The media cycle had moved on to newer obsessions. But Novak's comment jolted everything back into motion. Why? Because it re-centered the central question around Meghan. Is she who she says she is? And in a media ecosystem increasingly shaped by identity, values, and realness, that question is everything. Even people who had previously disengaged from the Meghan discourse found themselves reevaluating. They watched the clip. They reread old interviews. They revisited the Oprah sit-down, the Netflix documentary, the podcast series. Some found renewed admiration. Others, increased skepticism. It wasn't just the word that mattered. It was the context in which it had been said. A high-profile Hollywood premiere. A guest who wasn't invited. A joke made not behind closed doors, but in front of cameras. And a man, known for his intelligence and wit, who knew exactly what kind of ripple effect his words would cause. And ripple they did. Brands that had previously aligned with Meghan's image started holding meetings. Media outlets reconsidered pending features. PR firms drafted new talking points. Not because of the severity of the comment, but because of the volume of the reaction. In an age where perception moves faster than fact, and where public sentiment can rise and fall in hours, a single word had become a measuring stick for where Meghan Markle stood in the court of public opinion. And the results were not unanimous. There were people who still adored her, who saw her as a survivor, a woman who had escaped an archaic system and was now trying to build something better. For herself, her family, and the causes she cared about. But there were also people who no longer trusted her, who saw every gesture as calculated, every appearance as manufactured, every project as an attempt to remain relevant rather than to make an impact. The wannabe label became a mirror, reflecting back not just how people saw Meghan, but how they felt about fame, ambition, authenticity, and power. Was she a woman in control of her image? Or a woman controlled by the need to be seen? Was she a trailblazer? Or a tactician? Was she reclaiming her voice? Or repackaging her past? The questions had no easy answers. But they exposed something profound, that Meghan Markle had become more than a person. She had become a symbol of possibility, of resentment, of reinvention, of fatigue. And in a world saturated with symbols, the public often demands clarity, simplicity, a verdict. But Meghan, by nature or by design, defies that simplicity. She is at once aspirational and polarizing, inspirational and controversial. She is the story no one can stop watching, even when they say they've moved on. That's why BJ Novak's comment mattered. Not because he uncovered a secret, but because he punctured a narrative. He reminded the public, and perhaps even Meghan herself, that in Hollywood, as in life, you are always being watched, judged, defined, not just by what you do, but by how others perceive your reasons for doing it. The word wannabe hurt because it reduced. It stripped away nuance. It suggested pretense. And in doing so, it ignited a storm of reaction that exposed just how complicated Meghan's place in the world had become. Not because of who she is, but because of what we want her to be. And in the end, that might be the cruelest irony of all. Because the very thing Meghan has spent years fighting for, the right to define herself, may forever be out of reach in a world that insists on defining her first. In a city saturated with chatter, with paparazzi blurts and TMZ exclusives, with endless Instagram captions and soundbites crafted by publicists rather than people, it's rare for a joke, one unscripted sentence, to echo across the industry with such force. But BJ Novak isn't just another celebrity voice. His name carries a kind of intellectual authority in Hollywood's comedic circles, forged in the writers' rooms of one of the most influential television shows of the 21st century, The Office. BJ Novak didn't rise through traditional celebrity ranks. He wasn't plucked off a modeling runway or launched into the spotlight by a family name. His ascent came through the sharpness of his mind, the precision of his pen, and the unmistakable way he observed the world around him. His reputation was built less on visibility and more on insight, his ability to see people clearly, sometimes uncomfortably so, and then distill that clarity into a single, biting line. That's what made his Wannabe remark different from the usual red carpet snark. It didn't come from a place of spite or cheapness. It came from someone known for his meticulous observations of character, someone whose entire professional persona is wrapped around nuance, satire, and emotional excavation masked as humor. When BJ Novak speaks, people tend to assume there's a deeper layer. Often, there is. Before his rise in television, Novak's background was already setting him apart. He graduated from Harvard University, where he studied literature and wrote for the Harvard Lampoon, the humor magazine that served as a launchpad for many of comedy's most formidable voices. From early on, Novak wasn't just absorbing pop culture, he was dissecting it, questioning it, learning how to mock it lovingly while still pointing out its absurdities. But it was The Office that made Novak a household name. As both a writer and actor on the hit show, he crafted and embodied the character of Ryan Howard, a cynical, ambitious, self-absorbed temp who symbolized a generation of overconfident underachievers. Novak's portrayal wasn't just memorable, it was eerie in its accuracy. Ryan was both detestable and hilarious, a study in contradictions that often left viewers uncomfortable with how familiar he felt. That discomfort was intentional. Much of Novak's writing revolved around the tension between how people see themselves and how they actually behave. His comedy often exposed the discrepancy between projected image and real substance. And in that sense, his comment about Meghan Markle wasn't just a jab. It was, arguably, a continuation of his life's work. Because Meghan, like Ryan, like many of Novak's most famous characters, is caught in that same tension, who she wants to be versus how she is perceived. And when Novak uttered those words on the carpet, playing dress up again, it was as if he had drawn a line from fiction into reality. From satire into social commentary. The remark didn't just land because it was catchy. It landed because it came from someone who rarely speaks without purpose. Unlike many celebrities, Novak isn't known for tabloid drama or Twitter rants. He maintains a relatively private profile, choosing to speak through his work. His rare public comments, especially about other public figures, are calculated and sparse. That's why when he does say something, it's noticed. And that night, at that premiere, people noticed. Some might argue that Novak had no personal stake in Meghan's narrative, that he was an outsider making a flippant remark about a subject outside his sphere. But in reality, Novak isn't as far removed from Meghan's world as one might think. Hollywood is a tight-knit town. Behind the scenes, publicists share information. Producers swap stories. Writers lunch with actors, who dine with executives, who vacation with royalty-adjacent families. The overlap between Novak's world and Meghan's isn't as distant as the public imagines. They operate within the same sphere of elite media figures, brand builders, content creators, and strategists. It's likely that Novak had, for some time, formed an opinion of Meghan's post-royal persona. And if so, he isn't alone. What sets him apart is that he voiced it. In public, without apology, with just enough comedic detachment to dodge outright condemnation, and just enough bite to spark a cultural debate. But Novak's credibility doesn't only stem from his education or his work on The Office. It also lies in his evolution. After The Office ended, Novak could have easily faded into the nostalgic background of millennial sitcom fame. Instead, he chose reinvention. He authored critically acclaimed books, including One More Thing, a collection of short stories that delved into everything from existentialism to absurdity. He launched a minimalist writing app called The List. He experimented with storytelling formats, short films, and even produced a dark satire called Vengeance, a film that took aim at media culture, influencer obsession, and America's warped sense of identity. But for all the noise, one thing became clear. The quote had struck a chord because it revealed something bigger than a single night. It tapped into the slow, simmering shift in how Meghan Markle was perceived, not just by the public, but by the industry she was trying to re-enter. The word wannabe carried particular venom in Meghan's case. Her transition from actress to duchess to media personality had always been polarizing. In her defenders' eyes, she was a woman taking control of her narrative, escaping a toxic institution, and speaking truth to power. In her critics' view, she was leveraging sympathy and royalty to fuel a relentless climb toward fame and influence. And in Hollywood, perception is everything. To many insiders, Meghan's presence at the Naked Gun premiere wasn't just unexpected, it was uncomfortable. She wasn't involved with the film. She hadn't been invited by the producers or featured on the guest list. Her appearance didn't seem rooted in support of the cast or crew. Instead, it felt, at least to some, like an attempt to reclaim relevance in a space that had moved on without her. B.J. Novak's remark, whether intentional or spontaneous, had captured that sentiment in perfect, devastating shorthand. And yet, his comment did something else too. It opened the door for others to say what they'd been avoiding. Within days, anonymous industry sources began speaking to tabloid columnists and entertainment reporters, confirming what many had whispered but few had dared to publish, that Meghan's reputation in Hollywood had quietly soured. Not because of scandal, but because of saturation. The same media machine that once lifted her into the stratosphere now seemed to be growing weary of her ever-presence, her perfectly timed leaks, her press-blitzed philanthropy. It wasn't hate. It was fatigue. For those who worked in PR, casting, and event planning, Meghan had become a complication, a risk, a figure whose attendance at an event could generate headlines, but not always the kind producers wanted. She brought eyes, yes, but she also brought controversy. And increasingly, people weren't sure it was worth it. But this wasn't just about Meghan. This was about celebrity itself, how it's made, how it's maintained, and how quickly it can turn. Because in B.J. Novak's one-liner, people didn't just hear a dig at a duchess. They heard frustration, cynicism, a fatigue with the spectacle of it all. And they responded, not because they all agreed, but because they all understood. It was a cultural snapshot, captured in real time, of the uneasy marriage between fame and authenticity, between legacy and reinvention, between merit and media manipulation. In the days that followed, Novak remained silent. No follow-up tweet, no apology, no clarification, and that silence only added fuel to the fire. Was he standing by his words, or retreating behind the noise? Was it a personal grudge, or just a joke gone viral? The truth, as always, was likely somewhere in between. But for Meghan, the fallout was immediate. Her team issued no formal statement, but subtle signs of damage control began to emerge. Friendly outlets suddenly published glowing features about her grace under pressure and unbothered elegance at the premiere. Anonymous sources framed her attendance as a surprise show of support for Pamela, citing an alleged off-camera friendship that no one could confirm. An exclusive leaked that Meghan had just signed with a new talent agency, hinting at major projects on the horizon. It was a familiar cycle: spin, reframe, refocus. But this time, something was different. The public wasn't biting as easily. The coverage felt more cautious, the praise more measured. Even longtime supporters began to question the strategy. Was Meghan still telling her story, or was she just trying to stay in it? The very architecture of celebrity had changed since Meghan last occupied center stage. The world had grown less forgiving, less enchanted by brand mythology. And in that landscape, authenticity wasn't just appreciated, it was demanded. B.J. Novak hadn't delivered a joke. He'd pulled a thread, and as it unraveled, what it revealed was a complicated, uncomfortable truth, one that no amount of curated photos or flattering profiles could fully obscure. That in a room full of stars, being seen isn't always enough. Sometimes, it's how you're seen that matters most. To truly understand why B.J. Novak's comment resonated so deeply, why a single sarcastic phrase caused such a cultural tremor, you have to rewind the story. You have to look beyond the flashing lights of the red carpet and trace the quiet, often invisible, tensions that have long simmered beneath Meghan Markle's relationship with Hollywood. Before she was a duchess, before she was a media mogul, before she was synonymous with controversy, Meghan Markle was a working actress in a brutally competitive town. She had talent. She had presence. She had the drive. But she was also caught in a cycle that many in the industry know too well: too unknown to command leads, too distinctive to blend into supporting roles, and too poised to vanish into the crowd. For years, Meghan fought for recognition in a place that rewards conformity and novelty in equal measure. And yet, she didn't fade. She lingered, persisted. It was during her 7-year run on the legal drama Suits that Meghan began to taste the kind of recognition she'd always pursued. The role of Rachel Zane was smart, glamorous, and strategic, a character that mirrored Meghan in more ways than one. Those Suits was not a cultural juggernaut. It was consistent. It gave her a platform, a fan base, a growing relevance. Yet, even at the height of her success, she remained just on the fringe of Hollywood's inner circle. She wasn't a household name. She wasn't headlining blockbusters. She was respected, but not revered. Those who worked alongside her have given varying accounts. Some recall a warm, ambitious professional, prepared, collaborative, hungry to grow. Others describe a calculated presence, someone who knew where the cameras were even when they weren't rolling. But even then, the underlying sense was clear. Meghan wanted more. And then she got it. Her relationship with Prince Harry catapulted her into a stratosphere few Hollywood actors ever reach. Suddenly, she wasn't just a performer, she was royalty. A symbol, a global icon. The headlines were breathless, the coverage relentless. Overnight, she went from cable television actress to the most photographed woman on the planet. But this ascent didn't come without a price. Hollywood, for all its celebration of reinvention, has a long memory. And those who felt they had known Meghan before watched as she transformed, not gradually, not organically, but seemingly overnight, into someone entirely different. That tension began to show almost immediately after the royal wedding. At first, Meghan's re-entry into Hollywood seemed gentle. A voiceover project for Disney here, a few charity appearances there. But then came the deals, the massive, headline-making, multi-million-dollar deals. A partnership with Netflix, a lucrative contract with Spotify, a memoir in the works, documentaries, animated projects, lifestyle brands. It wasn't just a comeback, it was an empire under construction. And that's when the murmurs started. In Hollywood, few things are more sacred than the unspoken rules of ambition. Climbing the ladder is expected. Reinvention is applauded. But skipping steps, appearing to bypass the struggle, the dues, the slow burn, often invites resentment. For many in the industry, Meghan's rapid pivot from actress to duchess to media powerhouse wasn't just surprising, it was unsettling. She had left the profession. She had left the culture. And now she was returning, not as a peer, but as a mogul, commanding contracts and attention that others had spent decades earning. This didn't manifest as open hostility. Hollywood rarely works that way. Instead, the tension surfaced in subtle snubs and private conversations. Invitations that never arrived. Projects that never gained traction. Collaborations that quietly dissolved. Meghan, it seemed, was learning a harsh truth. Celebrity may bring access, but respect is earned differently. It is won through sweat, time, and most importantly, the ability to coexist within an ecosystem that values discretion as much as it does stardom. Even as her public image soared, interviews with Oprah, covers on Time and Variety, praise from activists and admirers, the Hollywood community remained divided. Some were inspired by her courage. Others were exhausted by the constant recalibration of her image. And still others felt something more primal, territorial discomfort. She had become, in the eyes of some, a disruptor. Not for the ideas she championed, but for the narrative she controlled. Every appearance felt strategic. Every quote seemed rehearsed. And while strategy is nothing new in show business, Meghan's version felt different, like she was trying to redefine the rules of the game while still playing it. This perception wasn't helped by a series of behind-the-scenes misfires. Reports began surfacing, quietly at first, then louder, that her team was difficult to work with, that meetings ran long and ended inconclusively, that projects were pitched with passion but lacked cohesion, that the expectations she set didn't always align with the realities of creative collaboration. One producer, speaking anonymously to a trade magazine, described a pitch meeting as intense and opaque. Another said, "It's like they wanted us to believe we were lucky just to be in the room." There was an assumption of gravitas that hadn't yet been earned. These weren't damning accusations, but they were telling. It was becoming increasingly clear that Meghan's name alone wasn't enough to guarantee success, not in an industry as saturated and cynical as modern Hollywood. And while her status brought undeniable intrigue, it also brought scrutiny. Then came the public stumbles. The Spotify deal, once heralded as a cultural milestone, fizzled out amid reports of underdelivery and creative disagreements. The animated series Pearl, focused on influential women throughout history, was canceled before it ever aired. The Netflix partnership, while still technically alive, began to lose steam. Initial enthusiasm gave way to quiet delays and shifting priorities. Suddenly, the woman who had once seemed unstoppable was facing headwinds. And the industry, never one to miss the scent of blood in the water, took notice. BJ Novak's comment didn't come out of nowhere. It came after years of watching this tension unfold. Years of observing Meghan's attempts to reinsert herself into an environment that had grown wary of her narrative. Novak, an industry veteran with deep roots in both comedy and writing, had likely seen this play out before, not with royalty, but with other personalities whose fame outpaced their foundation. He understood the difference between celebrity and credibility, and his quip, cutting though it was born from that awareness. What made it sting, though, wasn't just the truth behind it. It was the fact that he said it out loud. Because in Hollywood, where diplomacy often outweighs honesty, Novak's choice to vocalize what many had merely whispered felt like an act of rebellion. And perhaps, to some, even liberation. It gave others permission to question Meghan's place in their world. To say, openly, what they had only said in quiet corners, that maybe, just maybe, the Meghan Markle narrative was wearing thin. But tension doesn't exist without complexity. And Meghan's journey is nothing if not complex. She has faced real challenges: racism, tabloid cruelty, institutional rigidity. She has advocated for meaningful causes. She has spoken about mental health, female empowerment, and the importance of owning one's story. Her popularity among certain demographics remains strong, especially among those who see in her a reflection of their own struggles and aspirations. Yet none of that negates the Hollywood discomfort. In fact, it deepens it. Because in a world built on image, Meghan's duality, both icon and outsider, makes her impossible to categorize. She's too famous to ignore, too controversial to embrace unconditionally. And that, more than anything, is what fuels the ongoing tension. It's why her presence at events like the Naked Gun premiere causes ripples. It's why a joke from BJ Novak becomes headline news. It's why every move she makes is viewed through a lens of suspicion, admiration, or both. And it's why her path forward, no matter how strategic, will always be shaped by the unresolved friction between who she was, who she became, and who Hollywood will allow her to be. Because in this town, memory lingers. And so does resentment. There is a silent dance that takes place in Hollywood. One part charisma, one part strategy, and one part timing. The people who thrive in this industry are those who can master all three, knowing when to step forward, when to retreat, and how to make every movement feel effortless, even when it's anything but. Meghan Markle's relationship with Hollywood has been anything but silent. In fact, it has often felt like a performance within a performance, where the stakes weren't just fame or fortune, but legacy. The question that has loomed over her every return to the spotlight is deceptively simple. Is this genuine, or is this calculated? To answer that, one must go back, not to the palace gates of Windsor, but to the dusty studio lots of Los Angeles. Meghan's early years in the industry were shaped by the kind of hustle that defines most working actors. She auditioned relentlessly, took smaller roles in procedurals, made guest appearances on shows like Fringe, CSI, New York, 90210. She was far from an overnight success. Hers was a career built inch by inch, often with long periods of nothing in between. And yet, throughout it all, there was an unmistakable sense that she was striving not just to be noticed, but to be remembered. Her now famous blog, atThe, gave the world an early glimpse of that deeper ambition. On the surface, it was a lifestyle platform, a curated space for travel recommendations, fashion advice, recipes, and wellness tips. But it wasn't just about avocado toast and designer flats. It was a stage, one she controlled entirely. Through atThe, Meghan presented a version of herself that was polished, articulate, curious, and aspirational. She wrote essays on identity, spotlighted female entrepreneurs, and championed self-worth. In doing so, she built a persona that was just different enough to stand out from the sea of generic influencer content. She was more refined, more aware, and most importantly, she was watchable. But even back then, some in Hollywood noticed a certain pattern. Meghan didn't just observe trends. She seemed to mold herself to them. Her fashion changed with the seasons. Her interests evolved with the zeitgeist. If wellness was in, she was writing about yoga and green juice. If female empowerment was trending, she was interviewing social impact leaders. If mindfulness had a moment, she was meditating in Bali. It wasn't insincere, but it was certainly curated. There's a fine line in Hollywood between authenticity and branding. Meghan walked that line carefully. And when her relationship with Prince Harry began, it became clear that she had no intention of letting go of that narrative control. If anything, she doubled down. Their courtship was brief by royal standards. A few discreet months turned into an explosive media reveal. The announcement came with glossy photos, professionally lit and color-graded. Interviews were granted sparingly, always on her terms. When the engagement was announced, it came with a carefully worded message about shared values, humanitarianism, and modern love. Once she joined the royal family, Meghan appeared to try, at least initially, to play by the rules. She smiled. She waved. She wore muted tones. But it wasn't long before she began to push against the institution's silent codes. She made eye contact with the press. She gave unsanctioned interviews. She spoke about feminism and race. She didn't whisper. She didn't conform. That refusal to disappear into the expected archetype. The quiet duchess, content to exist in Prince Harry's shadow, was both her power and her problem. To many, Meghan's approach was refreshing. She wasn't a silent figurehead. She had opinions, charisma, and a background in media. But to the royal family, and by extension to the British press and conservative elite, she was unpredictable, uncontrollable, and soon, unpalatable. When Meghan and Harry made the decision to step back from royal duties in early 2020, it was framed as an act of liberation. But the moment they arrived in California, it became something else entirely. A rebranding, a reintroduction, a pivot into a new phase where their public personas would no longer be defined by outdated traditions, but by their own values, and more pointedly, their own brand. The deals came swiftly. A reported $100 million partnership with Netflix, a multi-year Spotify contract, speaking engagements for eye-popping fees. Suddenly, the couple was everywhere. Documentaries, podcasts, think pieces, mental health panels. Meghan, in particular, seemed to move seamlessly from duchess to dealmaker. In each of these projects, one theme remained constant: Novak's obsession with truth, perception, and the masks people wear. He wasn't just trying to entertain, he was trying to reveal. That context makes his comment about Meghan even more potent, because it came from someone who spends his life studying image, questioning presentation, and poking holes in public personas. To those familiar with his work, the remark didn't feel random. It felt earned, targeted, a moment of comedic honesty that had been brewing in silence for far too long. That's not to say Novak is immune to criticism. His comment drew backlash, particularly from those who saw it as an unfair attack on a woman who had endured more public scrutiny than most. But even among his critics, there was a grudging acknowledgement. This wasn't some late-night host fishing for viral moments. This was B.J. Novak, and his words came loaded with meaning. Interestingly, Novak never followed up. He didn't clarify, didn't double down, didn't walk it back. And in that silence, the moment became even louder. Some interpreted it as confidence. Others saw it as cowardice. But the effect was the same. It forced people to talk. Talk not just about Meghan, but about Hollywood itself. Because when Novak spoke those words, he wasn't just commenting on a single individual. He was commenting on an entire culture of aspiration, reinvention, and constant performance. A culture where people reinvent themselves every few years to stay relevant, where truth is often just another part of the costume. And Meghan, fair or not, had become the face of that culture. Her story, glamorous, tragic, defiant, was precisely the kind of narrative Hollywood loves to elevate. But Novak, ever the satirist, wasn't interested in elevation. He was interested in deconstruction. in asking the uncomfortable questions, in pointing out, as he always has, that sometimes the emperor has no clothes. His one-liner wasn't just a punchline. It was a diagnosis of a woman, a brand, a culture. That's why it hurt. Because when BJ Novak calls someone a wannabe, he's not mocking their ambition. He's questioning their substance, their intention, their truth. And in an industry where truth is often the first casualty of fame, that question is far more dangerous than any insult could ever be. For years, Meghan Markle's fiercest battles were fought against two fronts, the British media and the British monarchy. It was a war of words and symbolism. Headlines were dissected for dog whistles. Tabloids were accused of weaponizing race, class, and misogyny. Palace staff, referred to cryptically as the firm, were painted as silent enablers of institutional cruelty. And for a while, the narrative held. In the court of global opinion, Meghan was the underdog. A biracial American actress navigating